Good morning. This is Clint Hansen with Maui Luxury Real Estate. You're listening to the KAOI Radio Group, 1110 AM, 97.6 FM, 98.7 FM, and 95.5 FM. We're at 7 a.m. Monday morning, and I have our guests on Maui Real Estate Radio. You can always listen to this and any other of our podcasts on the MauiRealEstateRadio.com website. And today we have special guest, Troy Hashimoto, District 8, right, Troy?
Yes, good morning. I represent anywhere from Kahakuloa all the way to Waikapu.
All right. Mahalo, thank you for coming with us. And co-host, thank you, Byron Yap of Axia Home Loans, for joining us today. How's things going in the mortgage world with you? Is it still crazy filling out applications and getting people qualified?
Yeah, it's still a crazy time with low rates. You're seeing a lot of purchases happening. One of the things that I see happening too also is for people during this time with low rates, consolidating their debts or setting up their loan positioning for the long haul.
Absolutely.
So,
I've been actually saying that one of the things I've been coming to is trying to find inventory. With the complete lack of inventory that's out there right now, I'm finding myself reaching out to a lot of my past clientele, touching base with them. And it usually doesn't make sense for them to sell because, where are they going to go? Prices are kind of crazy everywhere right now. So I've been hooking them up, and I've been kind of surprised not more people have been taking advantage of refinancing their home. I actually refinanced my house, and I was able to get one point less on my interest rate. And after the refi of having additional equity, I had a much lower monthly payment, and I was able to take cash out and use that to basically replace or put photovoltaic on my home.
Nice.
That lowered my monthly expenditures dramatically. And in addition to that, I have an awesome solar package right now where I don't have to pay basically more than $20 a month for my electricity. So it really makes sense to refi right now. So have you been seeing people come to you with that?
Yes, we've seen quite a bit with debt consolidation, better positioning themselves or buying photovoltaic, different things like that.
I was kind of surprised when the Fed was talking because, they're always worried about hyperinflation. That's the big, key term that they're coming up with. They really need to play a delicate balance of maintaining the economy, and keeping, the liquidity out there while not allowing for hyperinflation. There definitely has been some significant inflation for certain products out there, mostly due, they say, to limited interest or limited manufacturing issues that they're dealing with. But nonetheless, they're trying to put a cap. And I was like, I'm listening to this. I'm like, okay, they're going to talk about adding a whole point. And when they were discussing it, it's really not until 2022, mid 2022, that they're talking about actually increasing the rates dramatically. So that actually buys a lot of people time, to get on the escalator, purchase a home. It's really, really tough here in Hawaii. Affordable housing is, doesn't really exist in a proper fashion that it should. So, a lot of times buying a condo is a very good rate to get into the market, build up that equity, and then in 8 years, basically use that equity to sell it and trade into a home. So, and wait for that opportunity. Condos actually are normally the big seller on our volume, but homes have been the big thing with a lot of people coming. What kind of loan packages have you seen recently for people looking to buy a condo? I mean, is it, you see a lot of FHAs out there?
Yeah, there's some FHAs, first-time home buyers. There's many different programs available. The hard thing is, of course, inventory. Inventory is one part of the problem.
Yeah,
but we are seeing, people taking advantage of the first-time home buyer programs.
I always, no matter what, the very, very first thing I do with anybody I'm talking to looking to get a loan is talk to a local lender. I know a lot of people who think about using an online program or have a lender that they use in the mainland. Or, I mean, I've even having people own a bank or being a partner in a bank. They're like, don't worry, I got this. We're going to get this loan through, no problem. And I'm like, look, catastrophic problems are going to happen because they don't understand the idiosyncrasies of lending on one of the most geographically isolated places on the planet. And fortunately, I've been able to convince a lot of them to go with the local lenders, but the people who haven't have definitely heeded my words, and I've been able to keep things together, but not without significant delays. So definitely always reach out, and Byron is one of my top recommends. That being said, I wanted to, we talked about some of the big issues surrounding Hawaii. And of course, the cost of living is the number one for people who live here, and affordable housing is a big issue. So, Troy, you want to talk to us a little bit about some of your interests and what you do and to help us out?
Yeah, so thank you for having me first off. And I serve in the State House of Representatives, and I am the vice chair of the Housing Committee.
All
And
right.
so we focus a lot on housing issues and how to push this housing issue forward. I think once we come out of this pandemic, housing is going to be the top issue once again, because it has been over the past probably 10 years for everyone throughout the state. And so we are really looking at various issues to help this issue. But, when I talk about coming out of the pandemic, one of the biggest things is that we are trying to first figure out how to keep everyone in homes at this point in time. And we know that the eviction moratorium that the governor signed in over a year ago is probably set to expire in August. He has indicated that he would like to see that end. The emergency period of COVID-19 is coming to an end, so he wants to cancel most of his emergency proclamations. From a government's perspective, we think that it's correct timing, that it needs to happen. And so this past session, my colleagues and I were working very hard to get a bill called HB 1376 passed. And the governor recently signed that into law as Act 57. And essentially what that does is it creates a off-ramp for those who are having eviction moratorium, as a safeguard for them to stay into their homes. And I know there's a lot of landlords out there who's just completely frustrated in this situation because they have had tenants who haven't paid rent for almost a year. And so we totally get that. But we also need to balance out the needs between landlords and tenants. And so 1376 tries to accomplish this through the use of mediation. And essentially what has happened is that when you've previously filed a court action, you'd have to go to court for eviction, and then the judge would order you to do mediation. And so we knew that once this program ended, there would be a flood of landlords trying to get to court, and the courts wouldn't be able to handle this. And so essentially what we did under the bill is to move the mediation from after court filing to before court filing. And we're offering a free mediation program to go through without having to pay and without having to do much work. All you would need to do is submit your paperwork to the mediation center concurrently as you submit it to your tenant, and the mediation center will set up this free mediation.
Is that like a free legal aid thing?
It is. It's through the Mediation Center of the Pacific, who does the court mediations already. And so it's more comprehensive, though. If you've ever been through an eviction, you go to the court, it's like 40 minutes of mediation. Here, it's supposed to be a 90-minute mediation session with professional mediators. And so the hope is that this will give you some result. It's likely not to give result for everyone, but at least we wanted to get that out of the way before the court filing happens.
Is there actually any available support for people who actually own the homes, the property owners, for legal aid? Because a lot of them are also on the process of losing their house. So not getting paid is, of course, a domino effect.
So that's an interesting question. And I think one of the things that we need to know first is that the recent stimulus package did provide the state of Hawaii for mortgage assistance. And the county of Maui is also providing some mortgage assistance to the community development block grant funding. So if you're having some type of issues with paying your mortgage, make sure you look at these programs. So there's a county program going on now. The state of Hawaii is supposed to roll out their mortgage relief program coming up maybe within the next month or so. So there is money available. And so, yes, there should be resources for individuals who, have mortgage issues. I think a lot of the emphasis has been on rentals, but mortgage is out there as well.
Now, I was reading that bill, Troy, correct me if I'm wrong here, how does it work? The landlord files it within 15 days of notice? what are the little nuts and bolts of it, are the main points?
Yeah, so I think part of what we were thinking is it's important to have a little bit more time, because this is obviously mediation is going to have some, it takes time to get set up, and so the landlord would file a notice with the tenant and the mediation center. So you have 15 days notice that you have to give, and this is up from 5 days. And so I think what happens then is you have within that 15 days, the mediation center has to get you set up with a mediation. And then you have another 15 days to then complete the mediation. After the total is 30 days. After that 30 days, you can go to the court if you would like. You could still be in mediation and you can choose to still go to the court, but you have to keep in mind that the judge will ask you, did you complete your mediation? And if one side says no, the judge can order you back to mediation. So you have to be careful on how you proceed.
Mhm.
And I think, the judge can't know what you discussed in mediation, because that is, the beauty of mediation. It has to stay confidential, but you do have to be careful on what the other party says, because I think what the judge is looking for is that you mediated in good faith. And so we left the judiciary with all the tools that they need to really make a determination. But again, we tried to get most of the front end work done, so that when you go to court, if you did it right, you should just be able to get a judgment once you go to see the judge right there, then and there. If not, you might have to get scheduled for another date.
That sounds a lot better than the free legal aid processes that are out there, because those are more like court appointed attorneys, to help prevent the eviction process. I got a client. This was a while ago, but in the middle of the pandemic process, and they actually have a home, and they were living in the home but having to rent several of the rooms out in order to maintain paying the mortgage and whatnot. And they're lucky enough to basically have another place that they were able to go, but somebody applied, and she had a property manager who, unfortunately, with their big heart, was not probably the most qualified person, talk and interview to these people. And he's like, look, we got to make this, we got to let them in. She's like, I don't trust these people, let's not rent it to them. He did it anyway. He rented a property out to them, and she lived there. And she's like, well, it's been signed, they moved in. They actually paid. Now, this is a note for everybody who's looking to take it. Make sure you're getting cash or a transfer, not an actual PayPal, because you can rescind that PayPal after it. So they paid no money, they moved in, and then throughout the process, they were able to evict the homeowner. Fortunately, they had another place to go. And they lived there for close to 6 months without actually being able to use the home themselves, and of course coming significantly behind. During that time, they actually ran a brothel out of the house. It was a train wreck of a situation. And then through the free legal aid process, they were able to get the support in order to maintain that long period of time without actually having to pay any rent during that time. The homeowner ended up taking a loan out so that they could get cash for keys, and then had to sell the property in order to make something work. So that's why I like the idea of a mediation process where both sides are considered, as opposed to a legal process, because it's a lot more complicated to go to, as opposed to finding a meeting of the minds. Not to mention, this is not like an entrenched person who's been there for a long time. This is somebody who actually came in with the idea of taking advantage of the system. So I definitely like the idea of taking more perspectives into it. And the problem that I see right now with the landlord tenant code is that while the tenants do need to be taken care of, it's also, there's two sides of every coin, and the homeowners are the people who are truly vested in the property, and their credit and livelihoods are resting on the line. So we got to make sure that we balance that out as much as possible.
Absolutely. And I think part of it is we have 4 months and above. That's the priority that this bill sets forth. If you have rent behind 4 months and above, you will go first. And because this is to allow for the mediators not to get overwhelmed and the courts to get overwhelmed. And then every 60 days after that, you will add a month. And this program will only go on for a year. And so once that year is over, then we will go back to normalcy for the eviction process. And so I think this is a very important off-ramp. I think it's a huge issue amongst the real estate community. I think we had a a talk story with the real estate association, and over 500 property managers came onto that Zoom. And so we were very surprised at how many people, but it shows how many people want to know what's going to happen with this and how to make it work. And I think people are very anxious, and I think that is just natural, because I think this pandemic has put a lot of kinks in there. I do want to put a plug in though. If you do think you qualify for rent relief, this is 80% area median income and below within Maui County. Please apply for rental relief, because you should check out on their website for Catholic Charities of Hawaii, who's administering rental relief for the county of Maui, what is that AMI requirement, because it's fairly high. I think for one person it could be up to 60,000 or so. And so I think we need to spend that federal funds down. There is a lot of federal funds that are available for rental assistance, and we need to spend that down. 65% of it needs to be spent by the end of September, or else we have to give that first tranche of money back to the federal government. So it's no sense that we waste that money. Hopefully it can go out to help people, and it can go back to as far as a year if you qualify in rental relief. And so I think even as a tenant, check that out, as a landlord, check that out, and see if that can be a source of income for back rent, because I think money is there.
What about people, I do know several landowners who have big hearts, and they've actually completely forgiven individuals and that had to end up moving in with family or whatnot. We're talking 3-6 months of not paying rent or only paying partial rent, and then going and saying, it's okay, go ahead, and we're gonna let you go. We'll get another tenant in there during this time, now that they've moved in with family or to a different situation. What about individuals who have already wrapped? There's still a big hole that people are playing catch up on, and they're not putting a judgment against their tenants, because they all understand this is a unique situation. A lot of one-on-one people that have a good heart, that want to make sure things work out for all parties. Could they go back to try to fill that hole with the assistance of the tenant?
So that is very tricky, and
I would
think
imagine
it's worth exploring, but I know the criteria is very strict. So for example, one of the examples that was told to me is that a tenant put their rent on their credit card, and they would then wanted to get reimbursement as back rent, and unfortunately they were denied because there is no paper trail of unpaid rent. And that's the hard part about this program. You have to prove that it was unpaid rent, that the landlord didn't forgive the rent, and that it's still active. And so we've been trying to advise people that, if you have a tenant that doesn't pay, you should work something out with them, saying, hey, rental relief is there for back rent and also forward rent, that you make sure that you come to some type of agreement that if you can get the rental relief, then it's forgiven, but if not, you have to create some type of payment plan. And so I think that's kind of the advice we've been giving, because the federal funds dictate how we have to spend it. I think if it was a state funded program, there would be a lot more flexibility, but the federal government is trying to administer this in 50 states, and in turn, here in the state of Hawaii, we have the counties administering it, not the state. And so there's an added level of complexity of trying to make sure that it's uniform.
So that's unfortunate for people who give the forgiveness.
Absolutely.
Then they actually can't get that money back. That makes sense though. Okay.
To change the subject a little, Troy, your family has been, I believe, 5 generations on Maui, and you've seen the changes with the housing, the infrastructure, and I know one of your big pushes is affordable housing. What ideas or what thoughts do you have on that? Because Maui is short of affordable homes.
Like 10,000.
Absolutely. So I'm going to primarily focus on Central Maui, because that's the district that I represent. And that is the area that the Maui delegation is focusing on very heavily from the state side. And we recognize that this is a very big issue. And I think we're watching what's happening in Central Maui, especially what troubled us is the sale of Maui Lani from the Weinberg and the Mills Corporation. They put the entire Maui Lani on the market. That's very concerning to us, because that indicates that they've determined that it's very difficult to build in Maui Lani and want to offload that to someone else. The other thing that we're a little bit concerned about is the mayor is looking at the Waiale project that EMB used to own, or I guess they still own that, but he's looking to do something with that, either purchase that or to put it in an open space. But I think the intent is not to develop that area, even though one side is already entitled. And so that takes out that area for future development. So when we take a look at all the development parcels in Central Maui, I think the only one left that is entitled is the Waikapu Country Town with Mike Atherton. And we're talking, there's smaller developments, but we're talking large scale developments, so, 1,000 homes plus. And so I think we've partnered with the Hawaii Community Foundation, who's very interested in the topic of affordable housing, and they're making affordable housing one of their topics. And they chose Maui because they have determined that it is very difficult to build on Maui. And so they want to see if they can help us through this issue of affordable housing. And so we partnered with them. And we've also put in some money for key projects in that Waikapu Town project that not only will help that project, but will help the ancillary areas within Central Maui. And so this past year, what we did was we put in $7 million for, and this was a match with the County of Maui, so they have to give half of that, for planning and design for a new wastewater treatment plant in Central Maui, because that was a requirement of the Waikapu Town Country project, was to install a new wastewater project treatment plant. And so we felt, okay, that infrastructure is something that government must take care of. And we've gotten away from that. We've actually said infrastructure is the responsibility of developers. But because we've done that, we wonder, why is development so expensive? Because it's nearly impossible to build infrastructure. When you take a look at municipalities across the country, infrastructure is the responsibility of government. And so we're trying to push to go back to that fundamental, philosophy. It takes a little bit of time, because when you talk to the county, they're not on board yet. They want to build affordable housing, but they need to get to that nuts and bolts. So we put in money to begin the wastewater treatment plant, to take that off of the Waikapu Town Country project. It's also going to help a lot of the Ma'alaia area. It's also going to help future development, because the Kahalui plant is over capacity and is also in a tsunami zone. So this needs to happen anyway. So the county should have been thinking about this many years ago. And the other thing that we put in money for is the Waiale extension. So one of the criteria for the Waikapu Town project was they are supposed to contribute to the extension of Waiale Road to Honopi'ilani Highway. And so the state said, well, even though it's not state responsibility, we will make sure that we contribute to this project, because we feel that this is important. We can say it's regionally significant because partly we need another elementary and middle school in the area. And I think the Waikapu Town project is where we're going to put it. And so we will contribute to this road. And I think that is very expensive. It's, and that'll take a lot of time and planning money and build out. And so we were working with the county to put that in. So those are two big projects that we put into the budget this past year, and we're trying to move those forward. The easy part in my mind is actually putting it in the budget. The hardest part is getting it done within the time frame. And so I think the future within Central Maui is in Waikapu. And I think that is our strategy. And I think the strategy also is because it's already entitled and the state is putting in a lot of money for infrastructure, is to then boost the number of required affordable housings in return for the infrastructure that we're trying to assist this project in. So I think we have a strategy, we have a game plan, we have a tangible project that we're trying to get off the ground. And the thing is we need this to work, because if this doesn't work, it's likely that they cannot do this project without this type of assistance. And that's another 1,000 homes plus that goes down the drain if we can't make this work. And there's very few other places in Central Maui.
So out of curiosity, do you guys work in partnership with, the Native Hawaiians in order to get Native Hawaiian housing as well? Because I know that's a completely different subject and, usually associated with ceded lands and whatnot. But that trading of property, I'm just wondering, with the Maui Lani complex that's there right now, I know that the big difficulty is whenever there's sandy soils, there is, potentially bones. And basically from there all the way out to Ma'alaya is sandy soil. So it's a large, intermittent burial complex. People lived with their loved ones. When their loved ones passed away, they were often buried nearby so that they could protect the bones and the mana that's associated with it. So that's one of the problems that has been happening with some of the developments nearby. It's always been that way for the entire Maui-Lani area, but people are more conscientious of it now. And that's, of course, led to more difficulties associated with the development process. Not as much of an issue, of course, if you get down to some of the arid lands associated with farming, because those soils have been turned up and processed, and that's not really a possibility to even recognize a burial site anymore. But that being said, I mean, maybe one of the best ideas is to have Hawaiians living with their ancestral areas so that they could, basically live and be in a spot that they can take care of and guard and be a part of a process of developing the land. Because that was one of the hardest things to go over, is they would get the approvals for it. And then as it would go on with these soils, they would come up, and then there would be an area and they would have to work around that, and they'd get to another one. And the difficulty associated with going through the process of the county to redesign a development in order to maintain any kind of profitable margin, and the entitlement is just, it's pretty difficult. And, if there was more of a dynamic element associated with the developers, on getting and approving the project, I could see it being less of an issue associated with it, because inevitably these things are going to come up. And I think it's a sticky situation, both with the county rules and processes that you have to go through, state, and of course, the very intricate process of dealing with ancestral homelands.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting concept that you're discussing. I think a lot of it though has to do with outreach, and I think the mayor is working very hard to do outreach with the groups that are spearheading these efforts to try and preserve the iwi kupuna in place. I think part of it is I'm sure that they would be very interested in that concept, but I think it's kind of difficult to figure out how to make that work. And I think part of it, we're going to have to move forward with some of these parcels of land. So hopefully we can come up with a compromise. That is the most important aspect. I think when you talk about homes for Native Hawaiians, though, we are also focusing on that. One of the early projects that the Central Maui delegation was really trying to get to the finish line was a new subdivision for Hawaiian homes. And this is Department of Hawaiian Homelands. This is people, there's a huge wait list for those who are interested in, their home that is entitled to them under the DHHL Act. And so there actually is a new subdivision, about 130 homes that will be going right next to Wailani Mauka. And so that is awesome. Entitled, that is moving forward, and they are just trying to go through the final processes of getting permitting to move that to the finish line, and that should be coming up within the next few years. And so that's a big project for the Hawaiians, who are especially been waiting for years and years.
Yeah. Do you know how long for Maui the DHHL line is?
That's a good question. I don't know what those statistics are. I haven't looked recently, but
probably over 1,000.
Could be, but yeah. I think we've at least been getting some people off the list, because we've had quite a bit of big lots, in Waiahuli up country, and that the subdivision is tremendous in terms of size, and so I think a lot of people at least have gotten something, but it's years and years of backlog, and so I think that's the problem.
One of the things I really go ahead, Byron.
Oh no, I was just going to ask. Well, you're going to change the subject. Why don't you ask him first, and I'll ask after.
Okay, so yeah, my big question, and what I've talked about on some of the other shows, is, and I've read with some of your information, is the idea of subsidizing the building process. Because we do have a very big issue of being very isolated, and the cost of building is really high. North Kihei condo project got put on hold and stopped well before the cost of materials, and even before COVID happened, because the cost of building has gone up so dramatically even beforehand, that it really, they're losing money. And how do you incentivize developers to build something that they're going to lose money on? You can, I've seen, of course, bills to propose like 50% affordable or whatnot. That just means no development's going to happen, which will push wealthier purchasers, to gentrify neighborhoods and remodel them, again, causing a shortfall in the available inventory. So the way I see it is, there needs to be a process in order to subsidize the costs for building. And I like the idea of making it more profitable for developers to create affordable housing. And the way I thought it could happen is using the number one resource here on Maui, and that's tourism. So if we gave like a special license, say, hey, you sell this house for 350,000, 450,000, what have you, depending on size and land usage. Then we give you the ability to vacation rent this home for 3 to 5 years, depending on the size, scope, affordability. And then you can say, look, this way the infrastructure improvements that go into place aren't going to be, hampered by the influx of tourism coming here. Instead of tourism causing issues in neighborhoods and tearing communities apart, you have vacation rentals building neighborhoods, creating environments for the people who live and work on Maui to flourish. This model, I think, works really good because right now tourism goes to help sometimes foreign governments, sometimes mainland corporations, where a lot of these profits get funneled off into the mainland. If you have, as Tina Wildberger says, a more transient oriented development model, then you have people coming in and spending dollars, and that increases the infrastructure and helps the local people. I mean, the people who end up buying these homes end up building their equity into their future for their retirement, for their family and whatnot. So, I mean, I love the idea, and there needs to be, other than just taxing other people and putting the funds over to somebody else, which kind of leads to, one side versus the other, to instead use the real and only resource that we have, which of course is a whole nother subject and problem, and uses that local resource of tourism to benefit the local people of Maui and Hawaii for that matter. To me, it seems like I would try to go towards that model and have Maui get built by the only resource that we have.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting concept. I think it might work in the resort areas of West Maui and South Maui. I don't think it'll work in Central Maui because I don't think there is an incentive for those who want to visit to be in Central Maui, nor do I think the residents want visitors to be in Central Maui. But I think part of it is, I think you're on the right track. I think you do need to have investment into a certain area. And I think part of it is, as I said, what we always look at is the model on Kauai, where there is about 80 acres that the county developed with and put in everything that is needed in terms of infrastructure and handed it over to developers. And I think the County of Maui needs to start looking at something like that and doing that for a developer and getting it to a point and entitle it. So then all the developer needs to do is come and build and do what they do best. And that is what they can put up houses very quickly. If you take away all the entitlement portions and all of the planning, they can do that very quickly. And so I think we need to figure that out. That took them about 10 years to do, and it was county government doing it. So I would imagine if the County of Maui did that, that would take about the same amount of time. And so I think we have to think outside the box. That is the bottom line. I think we have to look at all options. But I do have to say that I do not believe that putting moratoriums on resort areas is the way to go, because I think where you want the resort people to be is in the resort areas. And so I think at a certain point, why we have this frustration over short-term rentals is because it's so difficult to build in the resort areas. They're kind of going off into where the residential areas are. And so if we want to keep them in the resort areas, we have to at least strategically place areas where they can continue to be, because obviously we don't have enough inventory. And I think that that is fundamentals to land use planning. And I think of the land use planning of what Maui a long time ago was West Maui and South Maui were resort areas, and that's where they would be able to develop to keep the tourists. And I think we have to continue somewhat those lines of thinkings, because I think a lot of the infrastructure is there already. And so I think putting moratoriums on those areas to develop really doesn't make sense. And in turn, they're just going to go to other areas.
I think that makes a ton of sense. And 2 points that just to go on further with housing associated with it, definitely Central Maui does need considerable development for local people who live here. But I think one of the things that's important to note is that, it was one of the US's second largest locations for purchasing a second home. So, I mean, you have a lot of people coming in and purchasing those homes, and, you know, moving here actually, you know, as a retirement home because it's one of the few affordable locations that there is. So, and one of the things I'm noticing with the resort communities, of course, people live in one place like Central Maui, and then they work over on the west side. So that puts more strain on the limited infrastructure and roads to get out there. And if we can work towards, you know, of course, putting people to live and work in the same place, it's going to really help alleviate that congestion associated with it. And I mean, out of all the locations here on Maui, I think West Maui is the one that's most hurt for affordable housing and one of the most desperate areas to have it. I mean, I think that, you know, if a project like the idea that I mentioned of having a special license, you know, where 5,000 homes were being built on the west side, those should go to people who can live and work on the west side. And, you know, even give priority to people who are working on the west side and living in central, you know, because those individuals are traveling back and forth every single day, you know, 5, 6 times a day, 5, 6 times a week. And, you know, that would dramatically affect the infrastructure and traffic flow. I mean, the number of cars that go by every single second on that road is staggering, and just a small 2 or 3% change in the amount of traffic or amount of cars going by dramatically affects the traffic. So if we could target the locations and have, as opposed to a central hub where people live and then work in another place, you know, we should definitely be building affordable houses closer to the resort areas, but specifically be trying to sell those and give the first opportunity for a purchase to people who work in those resort communities, because there's managers, there's employees, there's wait staff, there's cleaners, everything that are, you know, living in Central Maui, upcountry, haiku, and they're driving there every single day. If you know, people are able to live and work in the same way, it's going to really help some of the infrastructure issues that are on this island, I think.
I would totally agree. I think that is live, work, play is the ideal in a planning, situation. I think the challenge is, somewhat South Maui is not too bad. I think West Maui is very difficult to construct new developments. I think you look at the Kahoma Village by Stanford Carr, and he's having after the fact issues, and I think that is one of the challenges. I think part of what people need to understand is that developers will get discouraged by these type of news articles, because I think they'll read it and they'll say, is it really worth the risk when I look at a potential project, if this could happen to me? And so I think if something as small as something that comes out into the news, that's going to turn away potential investment, and that's the unfortunate part. And I think part of it is we need to change that. It's not happening on Maui only, it's happening throughout the state. And I think when we take a look at incentivizing people, it's hard to incentivize when we have a lot of examples of things gone bad because developers have had such a difficult time doing certain things. So it's hard to incentivize people to take that risk.
Yeah.
Now, we're very fortunate, though, that in the villages of Leali'i, there is a Hawaii Housing and Finance Development Corporation funded project that is coming up. So at least there's something. That's a state funded project. Of course, it's leveraged by private financing, but you're right. I think we're trying to do more of that, but I think it's difficult to pencil out if the state is the only one developing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the reasons I think if we can increase the profitability margins from a loser and actually losing money to actually being more profitable to build affordable housing instead of, luxury homes, I think that's going to be the big point at which developers are going to say, hey, I can make more money and build a project and get more community support with this, specific tool, as opposed to building, big, giant homes that are going to be well beyond the affordability index. I think that developers like to work not just because they're looking for profits, but that does majorly motivate somebody because, who's going to spend 15, 25 years of their life just to lose money? And that's why I think your idea of having the county responsible for some of the infrastructure improvements make a ton of sense. But nonetheless, if it's more profitable to do something, the money, the people, the effort will come.
No, that's exactly right. And I think one of the other things that we really need to take a look at is our taxation structure. If you ever look at your property tax bill, it's very low because the county, through their property tax, does not take care of very expensive things like schools or the hospital. That's all responsibility of the state. But in turn, property taxes are so low here that it incentivizes those who are internationally or just on the mainland to come and invest in a second property because it's so cheap to hold that cost. Sometimes what I'm told is that it's cheaper for holding costs is less than a mortgage because you go to some places property tax is very, very high. And so I think we need to change that trajectory. We need to tax a little bit more, and there is no reason why we have any shortages in our budget here on Maui and at the county level, because there is room for a little bit more taxation on those second homes. And I
Mhm.
think there are ways to carve out local people, probably $1 million or less, or, maybe 1.2 these days or less should be a different taxation structure. At least there's going in a step in the right direction of tiering levels of real
Mhm.
property tax. But I think it needs to go a little bit higher based on when you take a look at comparables throughout the United States to disincentivize that second home buying.
What what got you into politics, Troy?
Well, I've always kind of been very interested in the realm of politics and just helping the community. And, I spent 8 years at the Maui County Council with Mike White. And so I think part of it is just you're able to make a difference within the community through your work. And I think a lot of jobs, it's sometimes you may not have that aspect. And I think it's very, very meaningful to try and be able to take on something that's a community issue and you can see it through to make actual change that'll help people. So I think that's what always enticed me to kind of stay in government and to stay in politics.
And I noticed some of your things you're focusing on is affordability or affordable homes, medical. Is that correct? Your focus is this term or?
Yeah, so I think part of it is, in Central Maui, we have the only hospital on Maui. And so we're trying to help to bolster the hospital. It's transitioning from a private, a state entity to a private entity through a public-private partnership. And so we're trying to figure out that because the state still subsidizes the hospital. And part of it is we need more doctors and nurses. And so that is a focus that we're trying to focus on because we don't want to go to Oahu every time we need to get medical care, and we want to have good doctors here in our local community, but we don't have the right infrastructure to create that at this point. And so that's been a big focus.
Yeah, one of the big things, of course, is having specialty doctors. It's one of the big issues here in Hawaii, and it's hard for people to come here. Profit margins are always really low, and the lead time associated for collecting from insurance is dramatic. Sometimes people will be waiting years for bills to get paid. Especially the specialty doctors, like ear, nose, and throat and whatnot. And I think an exemption for the GET would be a really good idea specifically for doctors and doctors' offices on island, because profit margins are particularly small. And with such a long lead time, it's really difficult to start a practice here on Maui. That being said, I noticed in the past, of course, the certificate of need came into a major argument with specialty hospitals and groups. And fortunately, they partnered and created the heart clinic here at the hospital. But that being said, let's just say, for example, somebody wanted to come to Hawaii and create a more advanced healthcare location for like an elder care facility. They would actually need a certificate of need because of that advanced medical care that they would be providing there. So I would like to, personally see more limitations applied to that, to, specific niches, not necessarily a general hospital, because it's important to concentrate those funds. But I think that should be one of the considerations if we want to see more specialty, on the island, specifically around elder care.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot that needs to be focused on in that area. I think what's very promising is Halemaho'olu, Halemakua are trying to collaborate to try and figure out what is the future of their facilities. I think that is very important because I think they have the long-term understanding of operating in the Maui community. We obviously will need more. I think is a silver tsunami going to hit not only Maui, but the state of Hawaii very soon. And we don't necessarily have the infrastructure for that. So we will have to look at our processes. Part of what the big problem is we actually don't have a residency program on Maui to recruit young doctors. Actually, in Hilo, they actually have a residency program. So that's helping them to alleviate the stress of trying to recruit new doctors. At least they have that program that will acclimate some people to stay on island, but we don't have that. So we need to establish that very soon. And we're working very hard to do that because at this point, when you take a look at the medical school, our state medical school, what is their retention rate of doctors staying in Hawaii? It's only at 50%. And the retention rate actually goes to about 70% if they do their residency within the state. But it's very disappointing that we spend a lot of money to educate these doctors and they end up leaving us when we actually need them. And they might be in the specialty area, but I think it's building that cohort of doctors who will invest in Hawaii. And the sad part is a lot of them are moving away. And what we really need is rural health. Because I think that's going to help us in that elder care. And so I think part of it is setting up that infrastructure very soon. We were actually, before the pandemic hit, there was a proposal to start a cohort of the School of Medicine here on Maui. So the legislature needed to put in about $1 million to get that moving. The House put it in and then the pandemic hit and that didn't really happen. And so we're trying to revisit that issue to see if we can do something in that area to move the needle. The other thing that the Chancellor of Maui College is really trying to push for is also trying to get a four-year nursing degree here on Maui. And so I think all those little things will help to recruit, but in turn, it's going to help the community because I think we all should be thinking, what is the plan, right? What kind of care can I get? And it goes back to the issue that you were bringing up.
So one of the things I noticed on your website is the idea of increasing, of course, more degrees to be available at, the local college here. And I was really happy to see that you actually have a master's in business administration. It's great to see, somebody who understands processes and, the very complicated workings of both business and any kind of administrative environment, having that applied, education being a cornerstone of that. Two things. One, the educational environment, how do you see increasing that and getting them to have more degrees available? And that being said, how would you streamline the government process of making the county responsible for easier for things to get done here in Hawaii?
Well, that's a big question. But
two big questions.
I think in terms of education, I think part of it is we need to look at the university system and kind of retool it. I think COVID has taught the university many things, and I think they need to leverage that. Because I think at minimum, it has shown the university that virtual is possible. And I think for neighbor islands, we need to take advantage of that. When you take a look at students who graduate from high school and you kind of simulate what it would take to get certain degrees in the university system, it is incredibly difficult. And one of them is to actually become a teacher. It is incredibly difficult to stay on island and get that at the undergraduate level. Probably at the master's level, it's a little easier. But when you simulate that and you determine how hard it is, you wonder, we start to wonder, okay, maybe that is the problem, because I think part of it is if you're a student and you look at what an uphill of a battle it is to get that certain degree, of course you're going to give up. And that's why we have a shortage in that area. Mm-hmm. So the university really needs to understand what it takes to really get your degree here on island. And we have some options. We have something called the University Center, but we really need to retool the easiness of getting your undergraduate degrees in multiple areas of need quickly and easily without having to fly to Oahu. A lot of them, you have to go to Manoa. And I think that's why a lot of people say that the University of Hawaii is Manoa centric, because you do have to go to Manoa for a lot of things. So we're going to try and change that. I think we have to work closely with the university to make incremental change. Obviously, distance learning is easier than ever before. But the in-person component is still very important. So we cannot forget that. So whether it's creating cohorts or people that you can interact with, that'll be very key. Okay. So relating to the county of Maui and being more responsive, I think it's we have to really think about who we elect to the county council. It's very important to make sure that those who are elected into that body reflect the needs and the desire of where we would like to go as a county. And I know there's a lot of decisions that need to be made in terms of how things will get developed, what policies we'll put into place, like the moratorium, what is our planning policies moving forward. But I think what we need to have are people that want to see things get done. You know, the answer can never only be no. And we have to
Yeah.
find that balance of how do we figure it out if that's not the way we want to do it. But the answer cannot always be no. There's other ways of doing things. There's other proposals of doing things. And I think part of it is the county actually needs to take a leadership role rather than just a regulatory role. And I think that's what we've been trying to have the mayor get into that mindset with partnership with the state to get into that leadership role. And so this is a pilot that we're trying to do with housing infrastructure. That's one little component. And we're having a very hard time, to be frankly honest, because it's a change of mindset. But my philosophy is if we don't try and we don't help some of these projects, then it's going to be extremely difficult if we just let a private developer do it on their own. So I think that is
Impossible,
at this point, and we're hoping that we may see some success.
That makes a ton of sense with the leadership role of the county. One of the things I notice in a lot of the meetings I've gone to is a complete lack of understanding of, you know, individuals' roles associated with the process and interview. They think that they're, an enforcement role, or they think that they're there to, impose their opinion or rules or ideals. It's like, no, you're there to help legislate a process. You're there to help, the voices get heard and go through. And I think a really good educational process to make sure that they understand simple things like Robert's rules and their role associated with council is essential to helping the process go considerably more smoothly, as opposed to getting lost in hours of discussion about things that don't relate to what they're there for. I think the county really does need to take a big leadership role to helping educate in the process and what people are there for in their role.
Absolutely. And I think our future really depends on what type of decisions we make. I think part of it is, as I said, it's a change in mindset and how we approach projects. I think the mindset in the past has been, let's saddle everything onto someone who's trying to do something, and then we wonder and we get really mad when it doesn't happen. And everything that you add has a cost, and somebody has to bear that cost, and likely it's going to go to the people that are purchasing something. And so that is the crux of the problem, and we need to figure that out.
So do you have you've done a fantastic job. Thank you so much for the interview. Where do you see yourself in the next 5 to 10 years in your political career? How do you see, you can help more of Maui? Because I love hearing you discuss things today. And I think you really get a firm grasp and understand some of the serious issues that Maui has to face.
Well, thank you. I hope I'll still be in the legislature. I think it's a very complicated body. It's a complicated body of seniority and partnerships and alliances that you have to form. But I think you can get a lot of things done. And so, part of me is I'll put in the time and I'll put in the investment, and hopefully we can bring in more and more investment to the county, to Maui Maui Island as a whole, and to try and move a lot of different projects and to help the community. I think the other thing that we look at is the big tool is capital improvements. And so I think I would like to see our new middle school and elementary school get built in Central Maui. And so it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of political capital, but anything good takes a little bit of time.
Yeah, and it's amazing how, even though we have our own district representatives, how we all play together and affect each other. Once I believe that there'll be less congestion associated with Central Maui schools as soon as the Kihei, high school gets built. So, I mean, I know on the elementary level, that's one of the biggest, most serious desires or needs that the island has. But it's amazing to see how each one of the counties really impacts the other, or not counties, but districts. So.
How does someone like me, not really in politics, how do we follow what you're doing, Troy? How do we reach out to you? What's the best thing a layman like me can do?
Yeah, I think part of it is you'll hear different things on the news, and that's a good thing. We try and get out. We send out press releases on various interesting big ticket items. I think you'll likely get some type of newsletter from each of your representatives, and I think that's a good way to stay informed. But I think if you just have an idea or just want to have a conversation with your reps or senators, I think reach out and or send us an email. And I think I always enjoy just seeing some of the thoughts that come out of some of my constituents. Obviously not everything is doable, and we'll take a look and we'll see how it fits into the bigger picture, because a lot of times something is already moving and I don't particularly have to focus on that, or it may be out of my jurisdiction, it actually might be in the county. But we'll try and help you to navigate that. I think that, but the most important part is hearing and getting the feedback, because it may not be on our minds. We're generalists because we have to understand and know a lot of things, but you may be the expert, and so we would like to know what that viewpoint is to make decisions better for us. Because when we have to make a decision, it's just sometimes we don't know everything, and we have to make an educated decision.
Well, we love blue jeans, that's for sure. It's been
Yeah,
so
absolutely. I think
helpful in the
easier,
process.
way easier than before, right?
Oh my goodness. I mean, there's so many times I've had to walk out before testifying because of how, long the process can take. And Blue Jeans has really simplified and allow there to be a lot more civic engagement. So I hope the county works towards maintaining that. That's been fabulous, I think.
And the state legislature has allowed that opportunity too. We've allowed to virtual testimony through Zoom at the state level. And it's unfortunate because not a lot of the neighbor islanders took advantage of it. And so we were wanting to get more engagement because we want to keep it. And so I think at the state
Necessary.
level, we're
Yeah.
trying to make sure that happens. At least for the county level, we actually changed the sunshine law this year in this legislative session. So the counties and any board or commission will be able to do video conferencing for their meetings. And so that's a permanent change in the law. And I think that is actually a good government transparency type of change that was needed. I think the sunshine law sometimes is updated, and so you should be able to see some of those meetings happen virtually still yet. But I think
What's the
part of it,
sunshine law?
so the sunshine law governs how open meetings work. And
Mm,
so you
okay.
have to have a meeting open to the public, you have to allow for testimony, you have to process test, you have to post an agenda in certain times. And so that's all governed by the state sunshine law. And
Mhm.
we want to make sure that you have access to your government appointees or elected leaders.
Perfect.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate all your time and efforts here on Maui, and your long life, multi-generational history here is great to see that you want to give back to the community that helped raise you. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today, Troy. And if anybody would like to follow up, you can go and see Troy or email him at his website. Can you give us that email address and contact?
Yeah, just email me at rephashimoto@capital.hawaii.gov. And you can find all your representatives at capital.hawaii.gov. That's OL, not an AL. And you can, make sure you can either go to their website or send them an email.
Mahalo, thank you much. And again, I am Clint Hansen with Maui Luxury Real Estate. Byron, can you tell us again a little bit about how people can help get in contact with you if they're looking to purchase a home or a condo here on island?
It's Byron Yap, NMLS number 860092. They can either reach me via email at Byron, BYRON.yap@axiahomeloans.com.
Mahalo and aloha. Thank you so much. This is Clint Hansen. You can listen to this in any show at MauiRealEstateRadio.com. Again, we're broadcasting at 11:10 a.m., 97.6 FM, 98.7 FM, and 95.5 FM on the KAOI radio group. Aloha and good day.